My name is Moriah Lenhart-Wees. Thank you for viewing my final presentation in our course, The Future of Education and Work. We have all just finished reading the book by Daniel and Richard Susskind, in which they envision a future after technology has transformed the ways in which humans work. And that got me thinking that I'm very interested in the field of foreign language. I'm a language person. I like to learn and read and hear and interpret foreign languages. And so I want to look at how will technology impact the foreign language field as it is now. The foreign language field essentially exists to solve problems. The problem is that people speak different languages, and when that happens, it's difficult to communicate between one another. And so what has resulted are we have language teachers who teach speakers of one language how to communicate in another, and we have interpreters who speak two or more languages who can go between languages easily and facilitate communication that way. And then there's a variety of other people who are also linked to the field of foreign language. That could be international businessmen or linguists who study languages and understand the nature and the grammar and everything about languages. And so this is the field we're talking about right now, and this is a field I've worked in the past. I've been an English tutor, I've done some interpretation. I currently work for the Confucius Institute that promotes the learning of Mandarin as a cultural bridge between China and America. And so I'm just looking at this field from a pretty broad perspective and seeing how will technology change what we're looking at. Right now, in our current day and age, we have a very traditional professional model of language education and interpretation. So you may see someone who's highly trained in teaching a language. They've gone to school to teach Spanish, for example, or they're a native speaker and they're highly trained there, and they share their knowledge in a traditional classroom setting. Another example of a traditional professional setup would be you go on a business trip to Japan, and because you don't speak Japanese, your company has hired a trusted interpreter to stick with you through the whole trip and interpret what's going on. And those are solutions to the language problems that have worked pretty well, but there are drawbacks, as Susskind and Susskind talk about in their book. Some of the drawbacks are it can be expensive. Perhaps not everyone can afford private language lessons. It could be inaccessible. Let's say you live in a part of the world where there's no Greek teacher, but you want to learn Greek. What are you going to do? It's not necessarily, these solutions are not necessarily going to offer high quality services. We can all think back to our days in high school. Maybe we took Spanish, maybe we took French, and how much do we really remember? Maybe not much. So it's not guaranteed to be effective just because it's done in a professional setting. And so there's ways in which technology can really improve and transform these models, but this transformation won't necessarily be overnight or very easy because people like the status quo. We're used to what we've had, and we also underestimate technology. And so if I told you in 5 years you won't need to sit down and learn Mandarin slowly over many months and years because there will be a machine that could teach you Mandarin very quickly, or instead of even learning Mandarin, you'll just have a machine that could interpret Mandarin for you. You would never need to learn the language yourself. That might sound a little far-fetched at this point, but that's probably not out of the reach in the long term, so we shouldn't underestimate technology. And so the next thing I want to do is look at what are some patterns and trends that have emerged in the field of foreign language with the advancement of technology. And so I'm going to go through a few specific concepts here and link them to things I've seen in the foreign language field. It's going to be pretty quick, but it will give you an idea of what we're seeing. And so we're moving away from having, one professional who's in front of a classroom sharing knowledge to what's called paraprofessionalization, which we learned about in the book. And what this looks like, and I'll give you an example, is a company called VIP Kid. It's an online service that connects Chinese families who want their kids to learn English to American English tutors. And these English tutors who are hired can not necessarily have to be trained language teachers. They have to have a bachelor's degree, but beyond that, VIP Kid provides them with all the well-designed curriculum they need, all the proven teaching aids that they can use in their class time, and essentially breaks down the task of teaching language into multiple parts that don't necessarily all require a professional to be present. And so a non-professional can deliver a very high-quality language lesson by using professionally created materials. And if this service didn't exist, then the option for a Chinese family who wants their kid to learn English would probably look something like, well, we need to bring someone over from America, or we need to find a foreigner, you know, an American here in China, and pay for them to teach our kid Chinese or English, I'm sorry. But now it's possible to do over online with technological advancements. And technology has also contributed to, you know, an increase in flexible self-employment. You may not have heard of it because it's a brand new company, but there's a company called Genie, and I like to think of it as the Uber of interpretation services. Because let's say prior to Uber, if you didn't have a car but you needed to get around regularly, you might hire a driver for yourself all the time. But that would get expensive and they'd have to be with you all the time. That's similar to an interpreter. If you hire an interpreter, they stay with you all day long in the foreign country you're visiting, and you have to pay them, you know, for the entire day instead of just for the few minutes that they're actually interpreting for you. But Genie is a great service because you use your smartphone. You might be in China. Let's say you're in a restaurant trying to order food. You can't communicate with the server. You use your smartphone and it calls somebody who's not located perhaps geographically near you at all, but speaks the language you need. And they get on the phone and then they can see what you see through your phone and they can hear what you hear and they interpret for you right then and there. And then 5 minutes later, you don't need their services anymore. Click, you're done, and that person gets paid for the time they worked, and they can work whenever they want to work, but they don't have to be a contracted interpreter. So it's a lot more flexible form of self-employment. Another thing we see is previously, if you are a language learner and you had a question, let's say on grammar, you might have to reach out to your actual professor or teacher to get that question answered. But nowadays, because information is so widely and readily available online, there are online communities of shared knowledge, things like wordreference.com, where language learners can go, and there's entire forums devoted to answering grammar questions or vocabulary questions. And even though they're not necessarily run by experts, these can be very trusted resources because many different users contribute, and so they kind of check and balance each other and make sure that the information that's being given is correct, and they're somewhat self-policed by the users themselves. That's another way that language knowledge is being transmitted nowadays. And we are also seeing a move from personalized instruction, so one teacher in a small classroom space delivering specialized lessons, to what looks like mass customization. So instead of enrolling in a Spanish course at your local library, you can get on your phone, use an app like Duolingo or Babbel, and then you know, have all the curriculum right there on your phone, and it can be used as many times by as many people as really are interested in learning. And then another great thing about these technology services, like these apps, is that they can be customized. So as you progress through the app and your learning language, it will keep track what you struggle with, what words are hard, what grammar structures you've already mastered, and it will advance you at the speed you need. So it will be a very customized experience, even though there's no actual teacher in front of you. And I think we're also going to see new relationships with technology, which means that where we would once rely on an in-person language teacher or an interpreter, we will just instead be working with a piece of technology. So what are my predictions for what this will look like in the future? I think eventually we may not need language teachers in the traditional sense or interpreters, because we will need people like linguists to work with knowledge engineers to share everything they know about languages and everything they know about teaching languages with the machine, so that machines themselves can learn to speak and teach languages. I think we'll also see an increase in virtual technology that allows us to feel as though we were in the same room with someone across the country or across the world. I could be 10 time zones away from my Chinese teacher, but it feels like they're in the same room with me. And so I think we'll see some trends there. I think there will eventually be no such thing as language barriers, not because everyone will speak the same language, but because we will all have access to interpretation software wherever we are. And then if we want to get very futuristic, which is to say that we don't want to limit the possibilities of what technology might do for us, instead of having a device that we speak into and it, you know, puts out the words in another language, perhaps we are simply thinking in our mother language, and then the device broadcasts what we're thinking, but in another language. Sounds a little sci-fi right now, but I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. And so how do all these changes and trends impact my own professional goals? I don't want to become obsolete, and I think it will take a little bit longer, but in the meantime, I think there's a lot of ways we can engage with technology and actually improve our field. And so in foreign language, I think we can use technology to strengthen human connections so that we can better and more easily communicate with someone who doesn't speak our language, and we can make language learning more accessible and cheaper and allow people who traditionally maybe were denied access to learning a language an easy way to pick up a language or to communicate with someone in a different country in a different language. And that's one thing I would like to work on. And another thing is, I think just carving out time each week or each month to explore what technological advances are being made and to see how we can implement them in our daily work is a good way to stay on top of technology and avoid falling behind the times. And so my future and my hope for this world is that languages won't become extinct. They won't go away, but instead we will have a world in which we can all communicate at all times, because there will be technology and interpretation services that can empower us to speak to anyone, anywhere in the world, regardless of their language. All right, that's all I've got. Thank you so much for a great course, everyone, and I look forward to learning more with you in the future.